All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In. We're on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network and available on all your platforms. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios with one more big stop on the road to Roland Garros. That would be the Italian Open in Rome. Madrid in the rear view. A lot to discuss, a lot to dissect on the tennis tours, on and off the court. But joining me now, wearing the best shirt I can say that any guest has ever worn on this show. He's been a broadcaster for many decades. He's been a voice for Tennis Channel as well as Pac-12, NBC, a lot of different coverage of tennis and other sports, and a friend of this show, Ted Robinson, returning to the program. Ted, welcome back. Love the Charleston Chiefs shirt, and excited to get into hockey and tennis with you.
Well, Mitch, I've known you a long time now, and I know you're a hockey guy, and most people now have no idea. I started as a hockey announcer. The first 6 years of my career back in the Coolidge administration, I was a hockey announcer. And the last 2 of those years, I was with the Minnesota North Stars. And Jack Carlson, who was one of the 3 real-life Hanson brothers in the film, Carlson Brothers in Real Life. Jack Carlson was a North Star, and I got to know him. He was a wonderful guy, nothing like, well, actually was very much like the brothers that were portrayed in the movie. So it's always, the movie has a little bit of a soft spot for me because, trust me, being in minor league hockey, it wasn't that exaggerated.
The old Federal League. And I know that, and I know one of the brothers, right, had a son that was at Notre Dame. I think it was about 15, 20. There's definitely a Notre Dame connection. I know you're a Notre Dame guy, and he was on one of the teams that made a run recently. So there's another tie-in as well for you. But Ted, it's delightful, and I'm always, love chopping it up and catching up with you on tennis. I want to just kind of dissect your last couple months here. And, first off, I got to say, I try to be impartial with broadcast booths, but loved hearing you and my guy Nico Pereira at Miami. That was a very good duo. He's one of my favorites, and you were just perfect together with him. Well,
that's nice. Thank you, Mitch. Look, Nico's great. And, of course, his presence in Miami makes all the sense in the world. He loves it. Everybody loves him there. It's what's made Tennis Channel fabulous for I'm kind of an OG with the network, but we've had an seemingly endless stream of great analysts. And I was really happy I had that chance with Nico.
Yeah, I told him the last time he was on, I'm like, hey, anytime, if you have an extra plane ticket, any of those exhibitions in like Puerto Rico or Venezuela, let's go. I can come. I can do some media there. But no, he's great. It was, Madrid in the rear view, and we're going to Rome. And I know that there's a lot of different times and different surfaces and issues that tennis players face. I love the Madrid Open, Ted, to transition to the current game annually, but it was an unfortunate run of injuries with what we saw. And I know there's going to be bigger conversations about why that might be. Sometimes the unfortunate reality is that some events are snake bitten. And I kind of got that sense when it was Medvedev, Lehechka, all the different things that we saw throughout there. Sinner pulls out, Alcaraz leaves it in shambles. It was an unfortunate ending to a good tournament that just seemed snake bitten this year.
Yeah. I mean, look, when Auger Aliassime, and good for him, he's a terrific player, but still he makes, the finals in an unrealistic, unfathomable sense of retirements, and that does diminish a little bit the result. I think it's a great point, Mitch, because here's what's coming up with Rome, where you have basically the top 4 men and 2 aren't playing in what is a major event in the last real, tune-up before Roland Garros. So my sense, having been around this for a long, long time, is that in more recent years, I feel like people around tennis have spent a lot more time complaining about scheduling and complaining about formats, and not enough time concentrating on what do we need to do to keep players on the court. And maybe this is the football background I had as a broadcaster, and I learned this more vividly being around Bill Walsh a long time ago, and famous for saying injured player equals no player.
Yeah.
Now that's a hard truth, and it's football driven, I admit, but there's something to it. And that's where I think, I hear the complaining about these events now, the Masters 1000s being too long. There's too much good tennis. Hello. And the scheduling of events. And of course, I've never bought into best of 5. That's me. I know a lot of my good friend Jim Courier differs with me on this. I understand. Reasonable minds can differ. But my point is the players are not gladiators. Keep them on the court. And I hope that tennis going forward, that's the address, not whining about schedules, but how do we get the best people to play basically the 12 to 14 major events a year that everyone pays attention to.
Right. The old adage of the best ability is your availability in a lot of ways. Now, I know tennis can be different because if you're the all-time greats, like how Federer was and even Rafa and Djokovic, it's like, okay, if you play less and you just win all the time, then maybe it's not about availability. But for the general consensus, I think it is about, as you said, keeping them on the court, keeping them healthy. The Yuri Lehechka one was a really tough one to watch, Ted, because you could see it was 100% legitimate. And his reaction, he knows he might not get back there in maybe ever, maybe, in the near future. So it was an opportunity that, was wasted. I'm with you. I just think that whatever we can do to keep these players upright, and really for the fans too. I know it's about the players first and foremost, but those were some very big, expensive tickets that didn't see a lot of tennis as a result.
Yeah. And Mitch, believe me, I've been around long enough to know I don't know the answers, but I want the conversation to be directed towards coming up with answers. It's easy to point out problems. Anybody can do that, but how do we find answers? So, one common reaction I'm hearing now to the extended 1000s is, I want to see players play every day. I like that. I miss that. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is that helping players stay on the court when you're asking them? I understand it's best of 3, but when you're asking them to play every single day, as opposed to giving them days off, which are almost guaranteed in these new models of the 1000s. And that's the stuff that I think the smart minds in the sport need to come out and say, wait a minute, let's be reasonable and rational and all point towards one goal, which is the events that drive the sport need to have the stars out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's still a lot of good going on in the stars. I mean, as far as women's matches go, Ted, I can't think of a better one in recent memory. Iga Swiatek defeats Aryna Sabalenka in a 3-hour final. Match points were saved. Match points were lost. It was phenomenal stuff. And these two always seem to play classic matches in Madrid. It's just banger after banger with these two. Swiatek wins this match, gets revenge from last year's final. I didn't have many nitpicks from this. I thought it was two exceptional players. There's going to be mistakes made when your opponent is so good and pressing. For Iga to dig deep and get one over her rival, you could tell by the reaction how she played that match that it just meant a little more. Like, in a weird way, I know it was her first Madrid title, Ted, but getting one over on Sabalenka, winning this match, meant more to her than I think the title did.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the narrative that comes out afterwards is about how she hasn't had to play many deciding tie breaks. She hasn't had to play that many close matches. And I'm thinking, French Open last year, Roland Garros final, down in the third set to Mukova, and you think this Mukova is going to finish this remarkable 2-week run, and suddenly Iga finds a way to flip. So I think the key, you said it, Mitch, is to get it on Sabalenka. And I look, the women's tour right now, the top of the women's tour is in great shape. And I think Sabalenka is a story because we get so focused collectively with our American pride on Coco. Sabalenka is a great story. I mean, to overcome the serving glitch that derailed her significantly a few years back, and of course the personal stuff that rose to the forefront in Miami this year, for her to overcome all that and be not just a tremendous player, but still a positive presence and a positive force, I don't know that you can give that story enough credit.
Sabalenka, when she hits the ball, I need those old school, like 70s cartoon sound effects, like kaboom, or like Batman stuff, because it's really the running forehand she's been crushing no one hits like her. Even Iga, whose game is tailor-made, and I can't rave enough about her movement, her defense, and how she crafts and doesn't give up out there. But even Sabalenka can hit through her at times, and that just shows you. Iga now is 20-4 in finals. I saw that number, and I thought, wow, we already know she's on the path to being an all-time great, but she's a big money player now. I mean, we've seen it. When she gets to a final, it's almost curtains in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm going to just slightly pivot because, take your point, Mitch, I mean, if there's ever a time that it makes sense for the powers of tennis, all of them, to get together and pursue what's been discussed in these proposals that we read about and hear about, uniting tennis, this is the time to do it. Because the women's tour right now, women's tennis is a ton of fun to watch. The best are there. Yeah. And we see it on Tennis Channel, for example. We'll see it in Rome. We'll see it again in Roland Garros. The early rounds, which used to be not terribly good for the women in majors. I mean, I came into the sport with Steffi and Monica and, Martina, and then eventually Jennifer Capriati, and people like that would just roll through the first week of a major 1-2, 1-1, 1-1. And okay, when does this really start? Those days are gone. And that's a
Yeah.
great compliment to the women's tour. So if there's ever a time for this sport to unite, right now, the women's tour, I think, has the strength to be able to push that.
Can I just say, just an aside, you brought up some names there. You're in a position of experience to realize what a lot of younger people don't, just how good Monica Seles was. I feel like that's, and I'm not taking anything away from any current or past player. They're all-time greats. But she's the one that I don't think gets enough credit for just how good she was and how much she did despite what happened.
Absolutely. And, sadly, it's one of the greatest what-if stories in the history of sport, really. That in my lifetime, it's one of the great what-if stories. And it's funny, as you started that phrase, Mitch, I thought you were going to say Steffi, because I thought you were going to say how great Steffi was, because I did see that pretty much from the beginning, and she was extraordinary. But and it's funny because it happened during the French Open, during a Roland Garros final 6-7 years ago. I was on NBC calling it, and we had a spectator run on the court during the final. Thankfully, did not approach either player, but we're now 30 years from Monica. How in the name of anything can anybody allow someone who shouldn't be on the playing surface to be anywhere near the players? It just can't happen.
No, it certainly can't. And getting back to just the current women's final, wrapping it up there, Sabalenka is showing you the consistency. I think if you take the 24-month approach to this, there's no one that's been more consistent in big events. I know Iga's got more majors than her, but she consistently goes deep. She won the big match. Really had to come back against the hottest player in the tour, Danielle Collins, early. Comes back against Rybakina, wins that match, and gives Iga all she can handle. So I heap praises on Iga on clay. She's the woman to beat. She's got 3 RGs going for more, but she's not unbeatable. The way Sabalenka's played, the way Rybakina can play, it's going to be an exciting Roland Garros with obviously Iga as the favorite, but 2 contenders that are right there.
Yeah, and I'm excited because I did see Mukova, gosh, I don't know, 2 or 3 matches at Roland Garros last year. And I remember at some point I was with Chanda Rubin on our air, and I just said, the way this is playing out, this is a why not Roland Garros. And Mukova was playing so beautifully. It might only been the 3rd round, but you could say she would walk off the court feeling, why not me? And my goodness, she came within a set of pulling that off. Now, we're not going to see her this year, but I'm anxious to see who will be that player this year. Somebody is going to hit it and is going to have that kind of run at Roland Garros in week 1. And we're going to look at her and go, why not you?
The why not indeed. More with Ted Robinson here on Tennis Channel Inside. And the men's event we mentioned was a little snake bitten with some of the injuries. We got a final, and a really good final in that, between Andrey Rublev and Felix Auger Aliassime. Andrey Rublev winning this title, now his 2nd clay court Masters event. Ted, that was an improbable one, not because of who Rublev is as a player, but because where he was mentally the last couple months. For him to step back in and, as he said, dealing with some sickness as well, to battle through it. The draw did open up, but full marks, full props to Andrey Rublev for riding the ship on the road to Roland Garros and coming away with the 2nd Masters title on clay.
Yeah, and he's by doing that, I think, has probably finally put to rest that narrative. Here's a guy that was dominating a lot of the tour but couldn't win the upper stuff, right? Can't get past the 4th round in the majors, and now he's won 2000s. And it's interesting for us because, obviously we all struggle to get the access and to learn about these players. But when you hear others talk about them and to hear the amount of respect Rublev generates from his peers, is pretty fascinating. And I've got to say, Mitch, I didn't know this until it happened. When Ruud won Barcelona, I didn't realize he hadn't won it above a 250. He's been in finals. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Lost it. And I went, wow, that's another stunning fact.
3 major finals for Ruud, and if he would have won the U.S. Open, he would have been number 1 in the world. But that's how the margins are and the opportunities there. I did want to say, and I know there's other places for stats. I just want to recite some of this stuff because I wondered, with Rublev, we watch, and on, the serve is an issue where we say, is this what might be holding him back? I looked at the numbers on the ATP website, and in the last 52 weeks, he's actually into the top 10 on their ATP serve ranking, and he's really improved across the board. The biggest thing that I've seen is he's now top 10 in second serve points. Whereas if you compare that to, 2023 as a whole, he's not really in the top 20. I bring that up to say everyone looks at his second serve and says, okay, this might be holding him back. The players are teeing off on him a little bit. The numbers have gone up. Tennis Insights also did a nice recap tweet that showed you that across the board, not just serve, it's little percentage increases across the board in his game. And that got me thinking, Ted, like this game, the margins, these guys are all great players, but what it comes down to is just getting marginally better at everything, coming up big in big points. It's not one thing holding him back. It's how can I raise little increments in all my areas of the game?
Every so often we find things that you can use data. A lot of times you can use data to fit your narrative rather than the other way around. I did this during Madrid. I looked this up with Alcaraz, and I was stunned. Alcaraz is at the top of the tour stats in everything except first serve points.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blown away. So we talked about it. It was with, I think it was with Monica Puig and then with Jim talking about it. He's 40th on the tour in first serve points won. But he's at the top in the return category, which, of course, has been the most, in terms of the basic stats, that's the one over 20 years that most correlates to the top of the rankings is where you come in second serve points, return points won, return games won, etc. So the point being Alcaraz, in an era when you think serve, his serve is not a weapon in terms of winning the points, but he's winning the games. He's winning his service games. He was 12th, I think, as of a couple of weeks ago, 12th in the service games won, but 40th in first serve points.
I'm buying Rublev as a legit contender week in, week out because of the fight that he shows. I know emotionally he's always been there and he's been, up and down, but he is a passionate player. I think there's a lot of good in that. I think especially this year, Ted, given what the unknown is, this is the first clay court unknown. I've been saying it for weeks, but you have injuries, you have inactivity, you have different things. So consistency should matter. And I think with Rublev fighting, I think he's somebody that could be in the mix for not just Rome, but Roland Garros. And then we'll see.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting because now we don't know about Sinner and, Alcaraz plays and then doesn't play. And obviously the Rafa question is still to be answered. Although I was fascinated to hear Andy Roddick on served give his take of, under promising and over delivering. I thought that rang true. So I'm going to hold my breath. But I'm just waiting to see who's healthy, who's in good form by the time we get to Paris in 2 weeks' time. Could somebody like a Tommy Paul? We've always talked about Tommy Paul being maybe the best hope for an American man on clay, right? Because of his athletic ability. Can Tommy put his game together and, be a guy that's going to be a little bit under the radar going there and string together a week that puts him into week 2 with, whoa, you better pay attention.
Well, that's a good point. I would say, though, too, that Taylor Fritz on clay is over-delivering what maybe we had all thought collectively. Mm-hmm. I know it was a rough loss to Rublev in the semis, but he makes the final in Munich, loses to a German guy, Struff, who wins his first title. He follows that up. He's playing nicely, and he's a consistent guy on any surface, especially clay. So, I know Fritz has been working on all aspects of his game. I think him on clay is a proven thing. But you could be right on Tommy Paul. If the health is back, if he's recovered from the Miami ankle injury, we talk about him winning that Roland Garros Juniors title too. So I did want to also give credit to Felix because he got to the final. It wasn't the way that, I guess he thought he would get there, but he beat Casper Ruud. He's starting to play better tennis. You kind of see why. Like you see flashes even in that Rublev match why everyone heaps so much deserved praise on him. He has weapons. He's an athlete. He's got tremendous size. The tools are all there. I just hope for his sake he can keep stacking good results.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's too good a player to be where he was. What was he in the low 30s? I think by the time they went to Madrid, so that's over with, and that's where I think we're watching Francis Tiafoe go through that right now. And the same thing, he's too good a player to be where he's settled here in the last couple of months. And what's going to be the thing that kickstarts him again? That's what we were all waiting to see because he needs to be back in the teens and pushing the top 10, which he did for a while.
Well, props again to Andrey Rublev, and just a shout out to another podcast that we've been, hyping a little bit as well. Ted, the Tennis Insiders, the one with Caroline Garcia. I had a chance to talk to her. They recorded with Rublev in Indian Wells, and decided today would be a good day to drop that episode, given the fact that he just won Madrid. So really a good insight on that podcast as well.
Okay, good.
We're going to, yeah, no, it's great.
I'm not familiar with that, so thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, they're great people. Her and her partner there doing some stuff there. I want to continue on here on Tennis Channel Insight and getting to Rome because it is the final stop. There is some uncertainty. The first thing with Rome, though, that stands out, Ted, is the atmosphere, watching the matches, watching the crowd, and then some of the stories I've heard, a lot of them off the record, about what the players who played in that event are like and dealing with the rowdy Italian crowd. It definitely feels a little more European football-esque.
It's Rome. And it's strange. I've been to Rome quite a few times. I was there in December of this past December, but I've never been to Foro Italico for the event, which is it's the one thing. Gosh, I wish I could find a way to do that. The thing calling it as often as we have from the States, you notice, is a lot of complaints about the court too, which you didn't see any of that in Madrid. You saw nobody come. I mean, the conditions are different because of altitude. But no one's complaining about the court. Everybody seems to complain about the condition of the courts at Foro Italico. And I'm not a clay. Very few Americans are. Jim Courier is a red clay expert. He can talk more intelligently about that. But and of course, last year it was just plagued terribly by rain, which disrupted the final weekend. And that was a shame. So you hope, because Madrid got through that issue with no problem. I hope that happens in Rome. Yeah, it's crazy. It's great. The Italians, when was Fabio, and hey, look, we've talked about this now for probably 7-8 years running now. What Italy has done in tennis is something that I hope can happen. Of course, we're a much larger country, but I hope we can see that happen in the United States. Italy has invested so much money in tennis. They have their own channel. You go to a hotel in Rome, you put the TV on, and they have a tennis channel. It's called Super Tennis. It's tennis 24/7. And they have all the challenger tournaments throughout the country, so their young players don't have to break their bank accounts traveling to gain experience, matches, points, etc. And you see the results. They're paying off with players in droves. And we had that starting here a few years ago, and sadly, the passing of Mark Hurd, who was a fabulous tennis supporter and fan, and had ended up at Oracle. Mark was going to support a challenger tour. That idea sort of went when Mark passed away. Somewhere, somehow, I'm hoping there's someone or someones who are willing to support and get something like that back.
Yeah, that Yannick Sinner interview with us at Tennis Channel, where he talked about how there's just so many challenger events in the country of Italy that have grown the game and allowed players to develop, because it's one thing to have your superstar golden goose that was going to be good either way grow, but getting that good to great is a real mark of great tennis federations, and Italy certainly has that. Well, I want to ask you this too as we get to Rome, Ted, on the scale of just insane stats about the greatest of all time. That stretch of 18 straight years with Nadal or Djokovic in the Rome final, where does that rank for you?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Was it Diego Schwartzman, right? Seeing Diego Schwartzman beat Rafa a couple of years ago. And of course, in Rome, and you saw him, as you would expect, his reaction was remarkable. And the fans in the stadium was full, and you could tell everyone understood what a rare event that was. And of course, best of three we get. But still, it's an extraordinary thing. And look, without Sinner and Alcaraz now, unless somebody else jumps in there and, decides that this is the week for them, or 12 days more accurately for them to go, wouldn't it be something to see one more? And I haven't even looked. Are they in the same half of the draw?
They could get to the final. And I think, Rafa, obviously a longer shot, part of it being the limitations where he's at. Did you find it interesting though, Ted, too? And we were all heaping praise on what Nadal's meant to the sport, obviously, and the tremendous ceremony at Madrid. He's not outright saying this is it. You can kind of read body language, though. We're all body language experts, but it does seem like he is taking moments in more than when he never had before. He's the most locked in competitor probably tennis has ever seen. But watching his reaction, it's kind of, I'd say, a little jarring to see Rafa kind of soaking in the moment a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a great call, Mitch. And I think it's fairly easy for us to draw a conclusion that he's enjoying what Roger didn't. And because of the injuries at the end, Roger didn't get the victory lap. And if this is a victory lap for Rafa, everyone's going to love it. Ultimately, we've all I think, learn. No one should ever tell an athlete when it's time. The athlete will decide when it's time. We also know, everyone who's worked around this business knows, there are rarely good endings. And Rafa may be able to craft a good ending. And if this is it, and that we're seeing the beginnings of it, good on him. Very few can do it.
Yeah, that's why I wonder with Rome, a tournament he's won 10 times, where his level of, I don't want to say commitment or focus, but how much resource he's going to put into, how much stock he's going to put into this event, given that Roland Garros is coming up and he wants to obviously play Olympics. He said that he's not 100% to play Roland Garros. That might be the under promising and over delivering side, but we just hope we get him in Paris. So however that happens, we want to see him play there. Novak Djokovic, though, Ted, is the other side of this because he hasn't played since Monte Carlo, hasn't won a tournament all year. We're like, this is crazy. We're into May. How have you not won anything? But it's an interesting time for him. He's shaking up the team a lot. He's reuniting with some people as he's let some others go, but he's looking for a result. He's got a top seed here with the top two other players and Alcaraz and Sinner not in the field. Mm-hmm. How do you assess where Djokovic is and what stock do you put in Djokovic in this specific tournament in Rome?
Well, in Rome, he'll be fine. I mean, obviously, again, in large part because of what you referenced, the two top guys that aren't there. I think, and again, I think this is a fairly easy one to come to conclusions with. Wimbledon last summer changed the final arc of Novak's career, whereas it looked at one point, hey, could he win 25? Could he win 30? And suddenly the fact that this young kid walks onto grass court and basically snaps Novak in the fifth set, that ain't supposed to happen. And I think that changed. And we've seen it with players in the past. I think it definitely happened to Roger at the end, that suddenly the aura's gone. Yeah. And you're no longer walking onto the court in many matches up a set because you are blank. And I think that happened to Novak in the Wimbledon final last year. That's just a sense on my part, but I think it's an easy one to come to.
I have another take that I've been kind of working through. I haven't really shared publicly. I'm thinking about it. And it's, he did so much after that Wimbledon final, right? He put all the stock into, I'm going to beat Alcaraz. I'm going to go into North America for the first time in a while. I'm going to win the US. And he did. He did everything.
Cincinnati, that was amazing. That was the one that
amazing.
Cincinnati.
Yeah. He wins the US Open. It's phenomenal stuff. What I would say, though, is how much did he put into that run, that push at that age?
Yeah.
I don't want to, it's not a direct comparison to Andy Murray, who was chasing that number one ranking wall, years ago. He did kind of wear himself down, but I wonder what that push took out of him to get that. And again, phenomenal stuff. Couldn't believe that he did it. He's the greatest of all time by all the accolades. But yeah, the aura might not be there. This would be a chance, though. This is, there's pressure when these guys aren't in there too. You know that as well, Ted, that, okay, Alcaraz and Sinner aren't here now. More people might expect him to win this event.
Yeah, I would hope Novak's not privy to that with all he's accomplished. That shouldn't be, that to me would be somebody, I'm just looking down, like a Medvedev or maybe a Rublev feels that more because, hey, the door's open now because there's two big guys not here.
Well, I would say, again, we got to see with Medvedev. I know he's in the draw, but he was, banged up last tournament. So hopefully he's playing and all signs are going. He'd have a quarterfinal date with Casper Ruud, the man that beat him at Monte Carlo. So that could be an opportunity there. And I would tie it into the opportunities. Guys like Alexander Zverev, who, have a top seed, but hasn't had that big result on clay, has been a contender at Roland Garros. Can Tsitsipas win another Masters 1000? The land of opportunity. And I just keep bringing it up, Ted, because in the past, we've just said, okay, Rafa's going to win all these, maybe Novak or Roger stand, but now there's a real chance here. So could a guy like Ruud, could Ruud, Zverev, or Tsitsipas make their move, or Holger Rune if he can put his game together?
And then you touched on Taylor Fritz smartly earlier, and I'll throw another name out there no one talks about, Hubie Hurkacz. He now has a clay court title in his pocket. That's at the top of the tour stats in serving.
He gets Rafa in that match. His first match would be assuming Rafa wins.
Wouldn't that be something? And so you start thinking of in Rome, yes, probably not as much Rome as at Roland Garros if the weather's warm. And we've seen what happens with Rafa playing when the weather's warm in Roland Garros and the ball kicks up off the clay. And you see what could Hubie do? What could Ben Shelton do with that immense kick serve if he happens to hit the right weather conditions on the right day?
Yeah, that idea that, and I don't know if I agree or disagree. I'm curious to hear your take, Ted. The idea that maybe some players might need a big result more than others, or are yearning for it a little more. I know everyone wants to win, and every result is a tremendous accomplishment. But say on the women's side, like we've talked about this big three, with Rybakina entering the Sabalenka Iga range, Coco Gauff can get to number 2 in the world if she outperforms Sabalenka in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Huge, because that's the other side of the draw from Iga. But a big result for her to win Rome or to even get to the final, I think that could be what the doctor ordered, if for nothing else, her confidence going into RG.
Yeah. And I watching her a couple of the matches in Madrid before she lost, I was, the double fault thing jumped in again. And I'm blanking on who she beat. She beat one player in a third set despite the double faults, which is that's the measure of your talent, right? You can overcome a shortcoming to win a match, but in an important match, again, it goes back to the Sabalenka point from earlier. Sabalenka seems to have put that completely behind her. I hope that Gauff can do the same.
I hope so too. The match against Keys, and I know Madison's playing better and switched up her racket, went with the string tension adjustments to, deal with how her injuries have held. But for Coco Gauff to have the serve problems, that's going to be a killer. It's a tough task to beat any of these elite women on clay, Ted. It's nearly impossible when you're doing all these self-inflicted wounds on the serve. So that's the part. And I know she's a very smart, thoughtful woman when it comes to all areas of her life, but assuming tennis. So we know, like Jannik Sinner, it's going to be a big picture view. But it's really tough to implement tactical changes on the fly because this sport, it's a hamster wheel. It just does not stop.
So is Iga a prohibitive favorite for you at RG?
Well, prohibitive is a funny way to put it, right? So, yes, she's earned that right. Now, there is, yes. So,
let me channel my Brett Connors. Come on. What are the live odds?
We were looking at this, and she's actually minus money to win the French Open. I don't think there's value there, but we're talking, could she, Ted? I mean, I don't want to say it's going to happen for sure, but could she pass Chrissy Everett's 6 RG mark? She's at 3 right now.
Yeah.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't it's a long way. But at this point, right, with her age and her performance, you can't discount the possibility.
Yeah, for our younger listeners and viewers out there, Chrissy Everett just didn't lose on clay for 5 years?
125 straight matches.
I mean, it's like just did not lose. Like you couldn't beat her.
Yeah. I was really touched. I was calling a match with Osaka playing in Madrid, and we were talking, and at one point I turned to Monica Puig and I said, "Have you seen Osaka slide yet this match?" And I got a little ping from Chrissy, which was great, that basically saying, "Look, you can't be a clay quarter without sliding." And look, I can come back. I watched Maria Sharapova win twice at RG without sliding. So, but I get Chrissy's point, and the overriding thing was, it was just great to hear from Chrissy. She was watching and responded.
That's why Iga, and that story is great, but that's why with Iga sliding into all of her shots, even the backhand, it just looks so graceful out there.
Yeah.
But it's very similar. The correlations with her and her idol, Rafael Nadal, prohibitive favorite, deserve it, have earned it, are the measuring stick. You get a big hitter who's serving well. Sabalenka Rybakina would be the model. I would say, okay, if she's going to lose, she's probably, to be honest, going to have a slightly off day. If she plays her game, the conditions at RG benefit her a little more at Roland Garros. But, I think she is. That's why tennis is a beautiful sport. And best of 3. I'm not saying I'm on your side of the best of 3, best of 5, but you had that variable.
Yeah, it's okay. You look, your point, Mitch, that you raised about what could happen in Rome coming up here is important because, of course, if Coco somehow can leap Sabalenka opposite half from Iga, and they play, of course, they've already played in one final. That would be a great final as well. And look, the men's draw day at Roland Garros might be the most watched draw in the history of tennis. When you have Rafael Nadal being pulled out of or whatever, however they do the Bitcoin toss. Now they do the digital thing. However they pull the names out of the drum. If Rafa is being pulled out of a drum in the men's draw, every man in the draw is going to be watching that.
Every man. Again, no wrong decision. Judgment-free zone here. Just want to ask, again, Roland Garros, they can do whatever they want. Yeah. How would you do this, the seeding Rafa dilemma?
Rafa, I would probably make him the 32nd seed.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can.
16 to 32 is I think he's got to be between 16 and 32.
And I understand we all know the arguments. Okay, so people come back. I'm saying projecting fairness. If we're trying to be as fair as we can to the 128 in the draw, Rafa Nadal has to have a seed. So I'd give him the last seed. Yeah. Make him 33 and somebody pulls out, whatever you want to say. Yeah. If he gets through Rome without leaving the court in a wheelchair, okay, then we assume he's going to walk out there healthy at Roland Garros.
That's why it's like if this was Wimbledon, they just put him in at like 1 or 2. I'm kidding, but yeah. You know.
I mean, it's trying to be fair to everybody. I mean, and look, I was critical of Rafa pulling out in Wimbledon. I thought that was terrible. To go through and, look, what he did to beat Fritz was fabulous, but then tennis lost when he can't answer the bell for a semifinal. And you wouldn't want that to happen again. So suppose he draws Alcaraz in the first round at Roland Garros. Does tennis win? Tennis doesn't win if that happens.
It wins for like one day. It really wins, but then it doesn't win. No. I get it. Wrapping things up here with Ted Robinson on Tennis Channel Inside In. It's always a pleasure, always a blast talking tennis with one of the OG voices in broadcasting. I did want to mention on a somber note the news that came out today about Dominic Thiem. Yeah. Reports coming out, still unverified, but some heavily sourced, respected individuals are saying that October Vienna is where he's going to officially retire. Word leaking out that may be the case. I don't think this is shocking or jarring, sadly. I just wanted to say, with a couple months to go until that date, that it's an unfortunate reality of sports that Dominic Thiem, by all accounts, was one of the good guys, one of the nice guys, a player that stood out in terms of genuine, appeal and niceness. But unfortunately, injuries just ravaged his career. It's a shame, and shows you that time is precious in all areas of life, Ted, but especially competitive sports where the body just could not hold up.
Yeah, and you think back, look, I mean, he was great. He's been a great player, as you said, a great representative. He's stalled. He hasn't been able to get his rank. He was hanging in the 80s and 90s for a while. Now I'm looking right now as we're talking, he's 128. So I get it. It does lead back to a question we touched on earlier. I mean, here's a guy that played every week for how many years? Every week, and was questioned by a lot of the people who follow tennis. Are you overplaying? And at some point, the body gave way. Now, I can't draw a direct correlation to the overplay, but it's a legitimate thing to wonder.
Yeah. Representing the game, no one in his era really did it better. He made 2 Roland Garros finals. Mm-hmm. He played Rafa both times. He's beaten Djokovic. He's beaten all the members of the big 3. He's, the Grand Slam that he won, it didn't involve beating one of them, but he won a Grand Slam in the era of those men. So you have to give him marks there. And I like to do this too, Ted, like the nation of Austria, he kind of put it on his back for a while too. They had success in the past, but nobody had really carried the torch and gotten to that point until Dominic Thiem. So I'm going to miss watching him play when it does come to an end. If my reports are true, it's October, but it was fun while it lasted. I can say that.
Yeah, he was no Tommy Muster. Let's put it that way. And Muster had a terrific career. Was a little less of a warm, friendly looking guy. Thiem was just extremely popular. You said he was an ambassador, and good on him. And there aren't very many happy endings in this world. And Thiem, is not getting the ending he wanted on the court, but at least he's calling it on his terms and his schedule, and I credit him for that.
I do like to see these players, and we can kind of wrap here, Ted, that have decided to come back, whether it's the mothers, in the case of just like Angelique Kerber win today. We're seeing players come back from injuries. And it can even involve a player like Andy Murray, where are they going to get to the heights that they achieved before? Most likely not. You never want to say never of a champion, but there's something refreshing about watching an athlete just go out there and compete and end competing. So I know that we'd like to watch them, as you said, do the Pete Sampras and go out on top. It's not likely to happen. I am very encouraged and inspired in a lot of ways by these players that come back, and in their own mind, they know they're probably not going to get to that mountain again, but they just love to play the game.
And having been, had 26 years or whatever with John McEnroe and becoming good friends, and listening to John talk a lot about his decision to stop, and then seeing, Jimmy that played until he was 40, to watch Andre, who played until he could not physically do it again. And then to see Pete do a John Goodman and cross home plate as Babe Ruth and walk right down the tunnel and say, see ya. You know, I mean, and the point is there's no one way to do it. And that's why you learn in our business, don't tell athletes what to do. They'll let you know. Everyone has their own, their own moment, their own criteria when it's time. I worked with a Hall of Fame baseball player once who played well into his 40s, and he told me I was never going to stop. The teams were going to tell me when. The day somebody stopped giving me a jersey was the day I was retired. So it was interesting. Yeah. He said, they're going to make the decision for me. I wasn't going to walk on my own. Everybody has that internal, personal criteria to go.
Yeah, everyone has their own reasons. These are professionals for a reason. And I'm just happy to be along the ride watching a lot of these players play and being able to talk about it and commenting on it with Ted Robinson here on Tennis Channel Insight. And this was so much fun. Last thing before we go, I got to give you props for, I know another sad goodbye was kind of the demise of the Pac-12, but you were the first voice that they hired on the call for Stanford Notre Dame football in the fall, also basketball, winding down the network too. I know that was an emotional, run for you at the Pac-12. So full marks there, and it was, fun to watch you call some of that tremendous action.
Well, thanks, Mitch. Won't bore everybody with the details of it here, but yeah, it's unnecessary. It should never have happened. And to make it specific to this sport, I mean, the Pac-12, a chunk of the Pac-12 has produced a lot of great tennis players. Everyone knows the Stanford tennis legacy, the USC legacy, the UCLA legacy. Even Cal has produced, our own Jeff Chisover and Harold Hecht, Cal Golden Bears. But I mean, we've had, Arizona's program has been very good lately with Clancy Shields coaching there. So that's a loss. It's a huge loss that I don't know that those programs can maintain their level of play given where they're now going to be going and asking their players to travel. So that's sad. And look, college tennis, we have so many examples on the pro circuit of how it can work. And that's the one thing I hope is, despite the insanity that has gripped college athletics, being completely driven by football, I hope tennis in the college realm can survive as a viable alternative for young players.
I hope so too. And I know you're friends with him, John McEnroe, but I'd love to see that streak broken. Give us a Grand Slam champion out of the college ranks. We've gotten close with some finalists, but could happen soon.
And John will still tell you one of the best decisions he made in his life was to go to Stanford for 1 year, coming off a semifinal at Wimbledon. And he will still tell you that. And I repeat that story every time as an ambassador for tennis. I tell young people all the time. And John has friends to this day, 45 years later. John has friends from that 1 year at Stanford. So college tennis is viable.
It certainly is. Ted Robinson, this was a lot of fun, as it always is, talking to you, picking your brain about all these tennis topics, gearing us up for Rome and then Roland Garros as well. We'll do this again, I'm sure. But thanks so much for coming on Tennis Channel Inside In. It's a privilege to talk to you. Look forward to the next time.
Stanley Cup playoffs, Mitch. Squeeze some hockey in the middle of your tennis. Come on.
Oh, that is guaranteed. But thank you again.
Thanks, Mitch.